What's up, guys, and welcome back to the InkCast. And we've got an episode where we're going to be talking about like the meta decks, the best deck to take into, your local championships that are coming up. So we're going to be talking about the championships. We're going to be going over some of the meta that we've seen in the last couple tournaments, and just discussing what we think is the best decks, what we think we're going to be taking in the next week or two to these events. And we're curious, from you guys that are watching this, what are you guys looking to take before we jump into this? Leave a comment down below. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, all the good stuff. But with that said, let's jump into it. So guys, we just had the big DLC up in Chicago. We just had another 10K happening over in Stone Mountain. I want to kind of talk through some of that, what we saw in the meta, because a lot of that's going to influence what we figure will be showing up at the shops and stuff. So we'll start with Chicago. I really want to do a deeper dive on the event, but life happens. We've all been really busy. So we're going to kind of do that here along with that 10K. But what were your thoughts? I know Brad, Prashant, you guys kind of watched a little bit of the Chicago with Green Steel, taking it down. But what did you guys think?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a mirror match, right? Green Steel. And it's really funny because we did our little, which I guess we're going to go over a little bit, the predictions we had for our tier list.
Yeah.
And we had Green Steel and Sapphire Ruby as the top two decks. And look at that. Green Steel won it. It wasn't really too much of a shock.
Mm-hmm.
I think we actually did really good with this list, by the way. I think we deserve a little bit of a round of applause, pat in the back kind of thing. So,
we had a few comments of people who were like, I don't think so, this deck or that deck. It's like, well, if you really look at what made top 8 there,
call them out right now. Let's pull up the comments that people said this deck was better. I want to see them being wrong and me being right. That's what I'm excited for.
We may pop a couple up, but seriously though, like I think we also did a pretty good job. But Prashant, from your side, I mean, I know you're a red blue player at heart because you came off of red purple. I mean, what are your thoughts coming out of Chicago and some of these tournaments? Like, what you expected?
Pretty much. I think with the Green Steel and the whole like Bucky Diablo thing being the new hotness, I think that's what everyone wanted to play. And then it was hard to beat or hard to counter. So
yeah,
it definitely went as expected.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I mean, like, again, I think Emerald Steel was the deck that everybody was like, oh, this is going to be the best deck with Diablo. And then we saw that happen in Chicago, but then we had a couple tournaments that happened this last weekend. I'll throw another one out real quick. There was a 1K that happened, and I want to say, like, looking at that top 8, there wasn't many green steel in general. It was a lot of blue steel, a lot of stuff like that. We saw another one happen that was another 1K that was mixed with a lot of green steel, blue red, and purple red. And then we had the big 10K at Charlie's Collectibles over in Stone Mountain. Again, one of the largest, I guess, tournaments. I think there's been one other 10K that happened, and red purple took it down there with Luca winning it. And Luca, I believe, is one of the youngest Lorcana players to ever win any of these big tournaments.
Was he 12? How old is he?
15, I thought.
Yeah, I think he was 15.
Oh, okay.
So still, again, the thing is, like, you can be any age as long as you know how to play and everything. But yeah, I think he was 15 taking it down. But yeah, like,
well, I mean,
again,
when we went to Atlanta, Britt, and I was doing like side events and stuff, I played against a kid that was like maybe 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And he was piloting the meta Sapphire Ruby deck and was very good with it. So like, again, actually, I think the best players are going to be kids that have way more time to actually play the game.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, especially when you used to have the online client that we won't necessarily name at this point, and hopefully we'll have a new one at some point. Yeah, with these guys that can, especially in the summer right now, can sit around and just play. They're definitely be much better than us with 9 to 5s, and we get to play maybe an hour or two a week if we're lucky.
Yeah.
But yeah, so coming out of that one, we had red purple taking it down against red blue in the finals. We had a couple Emerald Steel decks. We had 3, I think, that made top 8, but they all didn't make the final 4. They were in like 7th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, or 5, 6, and 7, something like that. So like, what are your thoughts there, guys? Like, again, we think this deck is kind of the A level, the next step down from these other two, but it seems to be doing pretty good. There was 2 of them in the top 8.
Well, the thing I've been seeing with like Ruby Sapphire is like it's constantly evolving a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were talking before, like the other Sisu has disappeared.
Yep.
The whole like ice block play, the Sisu on ice, pretty much decks. They're constantly evolving, and then they're putting in the Flynn because you want to cheat out that extra lore, especially if you're going against those Bucky decks. That way you could just keep up. So it's good to see that deck finally trying to evolve, and then there's more cards starting to be added in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and having the purple version, the Amethyst one, really kind of substitute the item package that the Seesaw and Ice deck usually runs with the Hirams and the Popsicles, things like that, for your classic bounce package that we've seen since set 2. It just makes a lot of sense. And again, it's funny, you texted us the other day asking to name like packages for each color. And originally what I told you was like just red or ruby being like removal, like, Brawl, your Medusas, your Trumaines, be prepared. Like that's like to me the identity of red. But for the current meta, I would actually kind of lean more into it being that 2-drop Flynn into 3-drop Sisu, because I don't think there's a single red list I've seen, regardless what the strategy is, regardless of what level on the tier list you'll put it. If it's like, it could be like the pirate deck for location, stuff like that, you're probably still going to run that Flynn Sisu combo because it's not super expensive. Flynn's a super rare and the Sisu's just a rare. So it's like, what, under $10 for both, for all of it? Like, come on.
Yeah, I think so. I think Sisu, because I looked at it the other day, is like $350, and Flynn's around $5, maybe $550. Something like that.
So I mean,
it went up a little bit,
but
he's not. Yeah, he's not the $10 Maui, which I think Maui's almost like creeping in on $13 or something like that now.
Oh, wow.
So they're all going up. But yeah, I think, when we talk about this deck, and I want to focus on this deck a little bit, because as we're discussing, and we're going to get into kind of what we think our picks are going to be for these store championships, but I think a lot of people are going to gravitate to this deck. They're going to say like, oh, it won the 10K, so I'm going to play it. Like, I want to play the number one deck, and this won the biggest tournament, the most recent tournament. And I don't think it's a bad deck. I think one of the good things about this deck is it doesn't necessarily have a quote unquote bad matchup, right? Like, if you think of some of these other decks, there is a matchup that's like 90-10, right? Like, there's just a matchup where like it's very hard for them to win. Whereas with this deck, I really don't feel like there's a bad matchup anywhere. Like, but a lot of your matchups are like 60-40, 50-50. They're very close matchups. So I think the biggest thing with this deck is you have to know how to pilot it. And when I think of like Kendall made top 4 as well with this same list. And Kendall's been playing these colors, which actually got me on these colors in set 1, I believe, maybe set 2 when the bounce package came out. But like, I think the upside of this deck is if you've already been playing it, the lines this deck can take. And realistically, like you mentioned, like the Flynn Sisu combo is about the only new stuff that's happened with the deck, which doesn't take that long to really get used to.
Yeah, it's a good deck. I will say, with it being an A tier, like we said previously, I do still stand by that. I still think it's not nearly as strong as the other counterparts. I think the strength of the other two decks that it has over it is, like you said, this is a 50-50 deck that really comes down to pilot skill. And the other ones, I feel like, especially the other control version, being Sapphire with Ruby, has a lot better of a chance to turn the corner because of the card draw it has and stuff like that. And also, we've even seen that deck, like Prashant said, also running the Flynn Sisu package, so it has a little bit of that as well in there. And then, of course, the Bucky discard is just very, very good. But that being said, all three need really good pilots to kind of like make the best of it. You said it yourself. There's only 2 copies of the Bucky discard list in the that 5K event that the Ruby deck won. And that comes down to pilot ability, I really think. It's just a very good deck, but there's a lot of lines in it, especially the early game. And understanding when to hold back and when to, like, kind of throw up your hand kind of thing and be super aggressive is actually a really tough thing to figure out. But yeah, I think Ruby Amethyst is just a little bit below everything else. It doesn't have any, matchup, like you said, that you're like, wow, that's a free round. But just you got to know the deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of taking it into the Magic realm, right? Because again, I know we used to play Magic a lot, and we still play here and there. But like when we used to play in the heyday of Modern and stuff like that, like I equate this deck right now to like a Jund style deck, where like Jund is one of those decks where now it's not, but for a long time it was a good deck. It was a 50-50 matchup deck. Whenever you played it, you always felt like you had a good opportunity. You could mulligan a certain way to where you could have a super aggressive start with your Thoughtseize and your discards early, or you could kind of shift it into like your big Liliana, whatever type plays that you were kind of working towards as your end game. So like, I feel like this is one of those decks where it's got a quick game. It's got not a long game, but a decent game. I mean, you have Castle. There's a lot of decks that just aren't teched out to take out locations right now. So you get a Castle on 4 and it gains you 6 or 8 lore is pretty big right now. Maybe it draws you a card or two. And so I definitely agree with you. I think it's an A+ deck. To me, it's the best of the A decks, but it's not quite S in my opinion, just because there are the times where like you stall out, you don't draw what you need. There's, the other deck, like a Bucky deck's just making you discard too many of the good cards you want. You get trapped with a bunch of uninkables because it does have Merlin Rabbit, Tremaine, Medusa. Like it has a lot of uninkables. Be Prepared is another one to where like if you just draw bad, you literally get stuck. And again, I know that can be said for a lot of decks, but I felt like when I was playing it, that can happen a lot, and when that happens, it feels really bad. But I don't know. I mean, like again, I think it's a solid deck in general, though.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So Prashant, like as you're looking, at the list, as you're kind of going through it, like what are you still leaning towards? Like, are you still red blue? Is that what you're bringing to the store championships and things like that, or these other decks? Make you think?
I believe so. I think I'm just gonna run Ruby Sapphire. This is what I started with. This is what I finished with. I'm not gonna go with the Amethyst Ruby, even though it's like enticing to try to play something that won it all. But I think I want to play something more, something I've been comfortable with. I might switch it up a little bit. I'm enticed to try to put in Flynn into the deck that I have. I didn't have Flynn in there. I'm looking at the other Sisu, so I'm going to take out the Sisu that has evasive and put in the other Sisu because the deck is evolving. I do have Bell in mine, so I might take out Bell and put in like another Tamatoa.
Yep.
And then there's one card I really want to make work, and that's Glean. Whenever you discard, you could discard you could destroy a item, and then you get +1 lore, or is it +2? I really want to make that work, but I don't know if it will in like the competitive scene.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those decks where like there's a few variations running around, like you mentioned, and it has evolved. We've dropped the evasive Sisu, that was taking people out. Brawl kind of seems good and bad in a lot of matchups as well. Like again, it's great if they've got a Diablo and you can take care of it, but then also if you're going against like red and purple, it doesn't hit a bunch of stuff. So like it definitely is kind of this hit or miss card, but because it's inkable, I mean, it definitely helps giving you an easy inkable target there. But from your side, Brad, because I know you've bounced between decks. So like with Prashant, I was really curious because he started with red purple, that was his deck of choice, but recently with the new set, he's really been on top of red blue. But from your perspective, I know you don't love net decking stuff. You've been trying to play around with some stuff and stuff like that, but like when it comes to the store championships, trying to win that Ursula card, that championship playmat, like where is your mind at?
think I would probably look towards playing. I would either be playing a Bucky deck, or I'd be playing a deck that I know for a fact beats both Bucky and Ruby Sapphire. And I guess in a sense also would beat the Ruby Amethyst deck. I'd look at those three decks as like a target.
Yep.
So I want to spend some time kind of messing around and like building something and trying to look at the other list and seeing what you can fine tune, or maybe some of these colors that are in the C and D tiers to see if there's anything that really stands out. Of like, okay, can you have really good matchups against all these colors in these different decks, or will you have to default to playing one of those three decks? And if I default to playing one of those three decks, I'm leaning towards the Bucky one because it's the most explosive. It's the one that I have the most experience with playing anyway, because I started out playing discard through the first few sets anyway. I just think that's where I kind of would lean to. But I really think there's got to be something somewhere in some of these other color combos, or even in these other, like, it could still be a Ruby Sapphire list or a Ruby Amethyst list that isn't necessarily the same as that. You just tech it out to be really good against these other three decks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, when we look at this list, I mean, what I loved about what Charlie's Collectibles and I think it was CCG was doing was they were trying to showcase, especially in the first few rounds of Swiss, they were trying to showcase like unique decks. We saw a blue Fossa deck on camera, which was really interesting, where it was like, typically your Mufasa deck is with red, and you've got all your 2-drop, tapper, or your 2 lore tappers. They were kind of doing the same thing in blue, which ended up being really interesting in that sense. And so, we saw that. There was some Emerald Amethyst running around, that again, the tempo builds that are going around there that looked pretty good. I know some people also brought like Purple Steel and some of these kind of other different decks, and it is cool to see that. But I agree with you. I think right now those three decks, even though we have red, purple, still kind of in that A. And again, if we were gonna put it in S, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, this needs to be an S, it's at the lowest side of S. And again, I don't love putting too many decks in S, because S really means like you're the top of the top. And if we just put 4 decks up there, like Blue Steel, because I do think Blue Steel is also a good, rock, paper, scissors within some of this too. It's got a lot of early removal with Kaboom, or the fire cannons or something like that, to get the early Buckies off the field, or not Buckies, the early Diablos off the field. It's got grab your swords to take care of the Buckies and stuff like that can come out fairly quick depending on how you build the deck. So I think all 4 are really probably where I would lean, in there. And again, Steel Song I think is always a sleeper. You know how to play the decks. It's a good deck, but I don't know. I'm leaning towards Emerald Steel. It's a deck I've been playing for a while. I've got variations on mine. Just did a video last week showcasing it a little bit, because one of the guys online wanted me to play the deck. And yeah, I think it's got some cool stuff. But I did want to look at, as we also look at this, I want to pull up the first place deck that took this down, the red purple. We've talked about red purple in general, but I do want to bring this up because if you're a new player, money can be a thing, right? Like building your deck and things like that. So if you compare the cost of decks, this deck is about $200. And some people are like, oh, that's expensive, but it's not. Trust me. Like this is a, I won't say it's a budget, but this is the cheapest of the top decks. You got about a $200 deck, and realistically, most of your cost is within just like random cards, like Maui. Maui is a $14 card right now, is what it's saying. You've got Be Prepared, which is an $8 card. You got Castles, which is like $7.50 in there, but everything else is like $2 or less. Even Medusa is only $3.50. So like, it's one of those things where if you're looking for the budget, the thing is your Mauis, your Castles, your Be Prepareds, not going anywhere. They're going to be staples for a long time, where you shouldn't even feel bad for investing in the deck. So it is something to keep in mind when you look at the list. And again, this is the exact list that we saw that took down the 10K that was first place, and some prices are on the screen for anybody interested to see kind of what makes up the deck and prices.
Yeah, no, not only that, like obviously a lot of the red stuff here is going to be staples for the foreseeable future, unless we get straight up power creep for them.
Yeah.
But there's a few examples of like, I would look at Be Prepared and Maui as examples of cards of like, even if we get power crept versions of them, it's like one cheaper. But maybe the trade off is, it's not inkable, like a cheaper Maui that's like a 4 uninkable, or Be Prepared that maybe is inkable, but it's more expensive, whatever the case may be. You're probably still going to be running Maui and Be Prepared as like, another couple copies extra just to have it. And on top of that is the purple side of it is just that bounce package is not going anywhere anytime soon either. And that's one I really don't think is going to get power crept anytime soon. I think they swung for the fences with that one with set 2 and didn't realize how synergistic it would really be in competitive and constructed formats. And that's where we're at with it. So this is a very good investment for a deck, I think, and one that you're going to be able to kind of fine tune and tweak. And, we talked about it a little bit with set 4, that Ruby Amethyst as a deck in general didn't really get a whole lot. And that's still true. The only thing it got was that Flynn Sisu combo, which turns out to be good enough to make the deck kind of come back up to the forefront again. But you're going to have sets like that where you get a deck, like maybe next set for Prashant, he is going to be looking at set 5 and be like, I can't put any of these cards in my deck. Why would I? There's no reason. So you invest $200 now, which I know isn't, nothing, but hey, that could last you for the next year or two, just with, minor $10, $20 investments every 90 days, maybe.
Yeah. And, on top of that, like, and I know I'll kind of throw it over to Prashant, because Prashant, this is one of the first decks you were building when you got into Lorcana with red, purple in general. So like when you had started investing this in set 2, you would have already had the Mims, you would have already had the Merlins. Like the purple side pretty much is the same outside of, I think, Chernobog's Followers. Maybe the only addition that we've gotten in Queen's Castle. So like Queen's Castle and Chernobog came in set 3. Everything else is set 1 and 2. If you would have invested at that point, you're picking up a couple cards here and there. So you can see like set 3 added 1 or 2 cards, set 4 added 1 or 2 cards. So it's over time, it makes it better too.
Yeah, I would say definitely as a new player, try to buy, I guess, the starter deck. I bought the red and purple starter deck to start off, and you get most of the cards there, and you get to learn how to play the package, or at least start that way, and then you could just build your collection in that manner. Instead of, I know I've tried to like buy boxes just for like 2 or 3 cards, and then I realized
for the content.
For the content. But I realized I just might as well just go on TCG and just buy the card we need. Especially hit the link below for TCG for us plug. But I believe you should always do that. Buy a starter deck, start from there. I know the metas change from here and there, but you can always build on what you know. And I obviously, like the 2 packages here aren't going anywhere. I think as you get comfortable in what you want to play, for the most part, you just add on here and there, or you change just depending on the new sets and how everything changes. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing to say too. Like I think there's a feeling of FOMO in a lot of senses where you're like, I need every deck, like every time this deck wins or that deck wins, I need to go get that whole deck. But the thing is, like, again, if you find a style that you like, because maybe you like control, maybe you like aggro or whatever, you can always modify that a little bit. But like, it does help when you say like, all right, well, I like Amethyst, Ruby. Amethyst Ruby has been good since set 1. Maybe you were a Steel Song person, right? Steel Song was good 1 through 3. And right now it may not be the top deck, but all it needs is a card or 2. And all of a sudden, bam, it's right back, as a top deck. Blue Steel's been the similar. Like, it was pretty strong in set 1 and 2. It wasn't the top, but it was probably right there below those 2 decks. And now we're starting to see some cards. Or if you would have invested in Blue Steel items, now you're just like, oh, let me add some red to it, right? And so like it is kind of one of those cyclical things to where you'll see every set there's been certain cards, and I don't like thinking back on it. I don't think there's been any one card that was like super expensive that just like disappeared. Like maybe you could say Maleficent Dragon, but she's still in a few of these lists and things like that. And kind of speaking of that, I'm going to jump over to the list that is Brad losing the camera over there.
Sorry.
The Ruby Sapphire deck that's here. And again, just trying to show some comparisons as we look through the list. So this one got second place, and this one is $440. So you're doing the step up, right? You're doubling your cost of what was there in the tournament, and you can see that like it's a big difference. It's double the price, but you have the other deck that took down first. This got second place, and if you like control, this is probably one of the best control decks. But again, it's where you're at with prices. And in a minute, we'll look at Emerald Steel, which will do another jump up. But like, yeah, I mean, when it comes to this,
it's like you're
this
doubling
deck,
each time you look at these decks.
So,
and I would say too, don't be discouraged by these prices. Like, especially in store championships, there might be like a few grinders, of course, that might have these decks. But there might be people there just having like just getting their legs under them, like me, and then just playing the game for fun. So I wouldn't be too intimidated by these decks, especially coming into store championships.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, when you look at these prices, right? Like we talked about Maleficent Dragon. I mean, that's a $35 card, and that's making up $100, over $100 of the cost of this deck. You look at, Sisu, we got three $20 Sisu cards, right? And realistically, you could probably run one or two if you don't have the others. You could replace one with another Be Prepared because it only has three. Like, there are some ways of cutting some of these really expensive cards. But going back to that investment, right? Like Fishbone Quill now is $11. This was a card that was like $2 a few months ago. But it's been there since set one. It's been used in decks since set one. But now that set one's getting a little more scarce, set two's getting a little more scarce, some of the prices are going up on these cards that are being used as staples in this deck. So definitely, like you mentioned, like if you don't have some of these, and I know I did a whole segment on this, and we'll do another one once we get to kind of the end of set four of top cards in each color. You'll notice a lot of these cards we're talking about are in that video because, again, with these cards becoming harder to find because people are opening the packs, you might want to invest in them now because honestly, like we don't know about reprints, if they're going to be reprinting anything specifically. I would imagine legendaries are least likely to get reprints in the future. Not to say they won't, because we may get another Rapunzel reprint at some point, but least likely than to see like a Fishbone Quill show up in some starter deck or something like that in the future.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna open up one more deck as we kind of continue down this path. So this is the deck that I was playing on the video the other day, and this deck is $820. So we have doubled our deck each time. I'm not saying this is the best list, because I know the new lists that are showing up have the one drop Diablo. They have a few other cards floating in and out of here, but this is the deck I was messing with on the video.
Just look at the reason for this price. You have 4 Tragic Heroes, that's a legendary. You have 4 Robin Hood Champion, that's a legendary. You have Diablo, that's a legendary.
Ursula.
Yeah, like you have Ursula as a legendary. So you have just 4 play sets of legendary cards that, again, like we've said, every Market Wednesday, as well as here, especially ones that are in sets, 1 and 2, which I know a lot of these are 3 and 4. But as we get further away from these sets, where these legendaries are, they're just going to get more and more expensive. Beast has been crazy. Like Beast dipped to $40 like a month ago, and everyone's like, "Oh, guess that's where it lives now." Nope, it went up to 60 again. So
it's 64 now.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's crazy. Well, the first tournament I went to, I pulled one in a pack, so luckily I still have it.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where because he's a 4 of in so many decks, And again, he was coming out of the decks with Robin Hood kind of taking his place, but then everybody's like, let me just run them both. So, you know, with him being a 4 of a legendary, and again, being from set 2, so set 2 packs aren't being opened as much now, it's harder to find them. And so the want, the need, and whatever of that card is just driving its price up. And I foresee the same thing happening with Robin Hood and slowly creeping up. But as we get further away from set 3, less people opening set 3, you're seeing less of it on the shelves and stuff. We still see it here and there, but as soon as we start to not see it because we have set 5 on the shelves and set 4 on the shelves, you know, these cards will go up unless they get reprints. And like I said, we haven't heard anything from Ravensburger about reprints. We do know they will do it because we've seen reprints in the starter decks. They've been commons and things like that. We have seen them. We saw in Ursula's Luminaire's Quest, we saw the reprint of like Piglet from the other set. So like we do have a few running around, but I wouldn't bank on it. I wouldn't bank that all of a sudden like Beast shows up in set 6 and you can open them again. Maybe he's an enchanted or something, but I don't know.
This is probably, as far as reprints go, I would imagine this is like, it's going to be a while until we get straight up reprints in main sets.
Yeah.
You have to be years away from like the last printing of a card.
Yeah.
And we also don't know if they're going to have like a standard environment where there's a rotation.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a rotation, then there's more reason for them to have reprints later on. But for now, with no rotation in mind, I would imagine we might get supplemental products, like you're saying with the starter decks, or maybe like these smaller, like mini sets. Instead of being like 300 cards, it's more like 100 cards. Or think of like core sets from Magic. I think maybe that could be something down the line, but it's going to be a while.
Yeah, because I think the problem, even though it's funny, this is with any TCG, right? Like everybody's like, prices are too expensive, make them cheaper. And then when they do it, they're like, now everything's too cheap, make them more expensive because I'm a collector. Like it's a fine line between all of that. Well, we saw when set 1 came out and everybody was gouging prices, and then they were like, we need product. They put it out, and then everybody was like, well, there's no reason to collect this anymore because everything's not worth any money because you keep printing it. And it's like, there's no happy medium. And I think reprints will do the same thing. Everybody will be happy, but then everybody who has their play sets are going to be upset that are like, I spent so much money on this.
But it's actually showing it's actually showing the health of the collectability of Lorcana with these prices.
Yeah.
So it shows that people are actually wanting to play and wanting to buy these cards, which is pretty good and I think is healthy. It sucks that a lot of people can't have access to these cards or decks, but it does show the demand of these cards and decks.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to Lorcana, it's in this very interesting position to kind of remove itself away from like other TCGs, where Magic, we've argued that there's been a problem of like an oversaturation of like special versions of cards, like alternate borders, full art, like no border, et cetera, et cetera. There's just too many versions of those, where Lorcana right now just has the Enchanteds. And I guess the first step into the other direction is the Ursula treasure or the quest thing, where you have like the tentacle border. But for the most part, it's just the Enchanteds where it's like, this is where you get your money. Yeah. So you could have reprints functionally and just have Enchanteds be like your main ticket thing for your collectors. To be like, this is what you should be chasing after. You're a whale after all. And then the second thing is like, I don't like the argument of like, oh, my playset got like, cheap or whatever. Britt, what did you pay for the captain from Treasure Planet, the set 1, the 6-drop in green?
Oh, you're talking about John Silver.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like probably like 18, I think was where I got him, but I know he went up to like 28 or something like that. He got up pretty high.
And what is he now?
Yeah, he's like $2 now.
Yeah. So it happens. It's like it's a fluctuating market. And if you get something like a Diablo or like an actual like a real good legendary card like these beasts, like all these cards we're talking about, they're like $50, $60. You have your playset. I would imagine you have these playsets and you invested this money because you're playing in tournaments and taking it somewhat seriously in a competitive standpoint. So the amount of times you've gone to tournaments, especially if you've won any, you've gotten your money's worth and then some for the playset you bought. So I don't really buy the complaining of like, oh, my playset, the I'm never going to financially recover from this. It's a hobby. It's just what it is.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, you know, if you're looking at building your collection and things like that, you just need to be aware of, I would say specifically legendary cards, because if you look at current sets or like the one previous set, realistically, most of all the money is in the legendaries. And even within that, it's within like 2 legendaries, right? 2 or 3 at max. Everything else is dirt cheap. And then if you get so far away, like chapter 1, we're starting to see cards like Maui, Fishbone Quill, some of these start to gain prices, and they're rares or they're, you know, below the legendary. But that's because they're being used as 4-ofs and they're in top decks. They're being used a lot. So it's more of scarcity of that. And I don't know. I don't know if set 3 will ever really get that same treatment. We also have to remember, like set 1, even though we got the reprints, it still, to me, wasn't printed probably enough for what the game's going to need in 2 years. Right. So I do think at some point we'll have to probably get like Rapunzel, Maui, specifically Rapunzel and Monstrous Dragon, because they're legendaries. But like some of those cards may need to get reprinted at some point just because of scarcity of it. But
yeah, I would agree that with set 1 and maybe 2, I think it need to be reprinted at some point because of like it wasn't print to demand, if I believe, if I remember correctly, right? For set 1, it was a finite run. So what there is what there is. It's kind of like we're gonna alpha and beta for like Magic and stuff like that. Maybe Ravensburger wants that to be the case. So like when you get the cards from chapter 1, then collectors are like, yay, I'm happy. And then the reprints might take on, in a perfect world, you'd see a reprint of Rapunzel be like $3, and then the original Rapunzel be like $200 5 years from now. You know, like that's kind of what we want to see.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see what that looks like, just because they are still opening to other countries. So like, for instance, Australia just got into Lorcana. So they just got, again, we don't know if it's like a brand new printing of set 1. We don't know if this was like stock that they had in warehouses. They were waiting to ship somewhere, you know, in a couple other countries are coming online. So it will be interesting to see as they continue to roll it out, because I imagine that these other countries too, they're not just gonna be like, sorry, you don't get the first 2 sets. They did like a speed run through their releasing of sets, but they did get like first chapter and stuff. So yeah, it will be interesting to see if more and more will hit the market with that, even though they're in a different country, but still hitting the market to help out or not. But yeah, I mean, all in all, I love where Lorcana's going with this, and I know we've kind of went a bunch of different directions, but for the most part, you know, we were trying to just look at some of the decks there, and we want to make sure that you guys are aware, like when it comes to these decks, not only is it what do we think the best deck is, but if you're trying to figure out what you want to take to your store and you're not sure like what you're focusing on, keep in mind you're looking at something like Emerald Steel, $800. If you're looking at Blue Red, $400, and if you're looking at Red Purple, it's around $200. And of course, like you said, Brad, you can come up with your own build. You can, what you got, you know, use the cards you got, come in there with a Blue Fossa deck, whatever you may have, to see what you can do there. But I wanted to kind of go through what we think are kind of the top decks there. And like I said, I still think Blue Steel has a chance. I still think that Amber Steel, Steel Song has a chance, but at the same time, it can come down to how well you know your deck, what your matchups are, all that good stuff. But any last thoughts as we wrap up, just with our thoughts and opinions of what we think is going to be the best deck, or what you should be taking, or what we're taking to these store championships?
I guess my biggest thing is do what Prashant's doing and play the same deck forever and ever and ever. Never switch. I mean, really, it comes down to pilot building. We talked about this all the time. Don't flip flop. Like I even if you have the expendable income, where you can, you know, invest in all the different playsets of cards and like try this deck, try that deck, try this deck, try that deck. If you're looking to, you know, compete in the set championships coming around, just pick a deck. And even if it's the A tier list and not like the best deck ever, That's okay. As long as you're good at piloting it. Britt, you won a set championship with Steel Amethyst, and that was on a lot of people's tier lists, like Species, as well as I know Podcana. They both had tier lists with that color combination in C tier. So you won us a championship with that because you knew how to pilot the deck.
Yeah.
You and I had sidebar conversations about like, mulligan plans for different decks in the meta, and we knew how to like attack those different decks, and we practiced that in our playtesting, and it worked great for you. So just play the deck repetitive over and over and over again, get good with that deck, and you can find success. You don't need to pick the S tier deck. Just pick one.
Yeah. Any last thoughts for Sean?
I would say stick with what you know, and then if you're not so sure to go to a store championship, just go for the heck of it, just for the experience, have fun. You'll meet new people and just play whatever. If you have a stack of cards in your house or you bought like a starter deck, just break it open and then start playing.
Absolutely. Well, we will follow this up, I'm sure, with some of our insights as we go to some of our first store championships, maybe giving breakdowns of what we saw at the store, what we used, how it went, and all of that. Because this time around, multiple weekends. Got 4 weekends of matches, and you can travel around, see how many you can win. We're going to try to get in more than one this time. I know last time we did the one and done, but hopefully this time we can go to multiples and maybe come back with multiple Ursulas. Who knows?
We're going to get a play set.
Yeah.
We're going to get a play set of Ursulas.
We get a play set, and then maybe, who knows? I'll throw this out there. If we get more than a play set and we end up getting, I don't know, X, we'll figure out the number, but X subs and all of that, maybe we'll give one away. I don't know. We'll see. So we got to win 5 first. So that's number one goal.
We can do that. There's 3 of us.
Yeah. But again, appreciate you guys for watching the video. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, everything down below. And stay tuned because we got a lot more content coming out, as well as what Brad was mentioning with the engines, architect, groups of cards, combos, whatever you want to call them. Got that deck, that video in the works. So we'll get that out soon. Appreciate you guys, and until next time, I'll take it easy.